from the CyberHub bunker and studio. You're listening to the CISO Talk Podcast. No sales, no bullshit, just straight talk. Straight talk. And now for your host and CISO, James Azar.
Hey, CISO land. Welcome to the CISO Talk Podcast. That's a brand new intro. Patrick, you got to break in my brand new intro to the podcast.
I loved it.
Right? No sales, no bullshit, straight talk. Joining me today is one of my dearest friends, like a person I absolutely adore, the executive director of the Ntsc, the National Technology Security Coalition. They do the job that none of us want to do, which is go talk to elected officials about cybersecurity policy. Patrick, welcome back. It's been a while.
It has. And thank you for inviting me to be here today. It has been far too long, James.
It has been, but this year has been crazy, obviously, with a lot of stuff going on. So, for a lot of our audience, they may have not heard of the Ntsc. So while I know the Ntsc and love the Ntsc, would you just share a little bit about what the Ntsc does?
Sure. We're about to enter our fifth year. I tell people that the abbreviated narrative on the Ntsc is our goal is to be the voice of the Chief Information Security Officer on Capitol Hill. Our mission is to bring the voice of the practitioner to the Hill. If you've ever been to a hearing on Capitol Hill, there are a lot of people at hearing, the SVP of Symantec, McAfee, VMware, IBM Security, all incredibly smart and bright people. But none of them are Kevin McKenzie at Dollar Tree defending 22,000 stores across the nation day in and day out. So our goal is to bring that voice of the practitioner to the legislative leaders so that they understand that when they're looking at legislation, they understand how it might impact a practitioner, because ultimately the CISO is the person who typically has to deal with cybersecurity legislation.
And the CISO is the person who has to deal with the back end of that. One of the things I remember when I was on the board is we always talked about data breach notification laws, right?
And that remains our number one priority. We've been working this year, just recently, with Senator Portman out of Ohio, and he has a bill which we think will be dropped on the floor soon as we get through the current environment. And I'm not talking about COVID, I'm talking about the elections. And we get on the other side of that. It's a bill to create a national data breach notification mandate that would preempt all the existing state legislation, and that is shaped similar to the Ohio state cyber legislation. And of course, Senator Portman comes from Ohio, so that would make sense. But fundamentally, it says that if you're an enterprise and you're following a prescribed set of security measures, whether it's NIST or ISO or any of the recognized cyber standards, and you get breached, then you have a defense against any action that might be taken against you. So it encourages companies to adhere to cybersecurity standards, which provides them a defense if they get breached, as long as you're not guilty of any, egregious, malfeasance. You haven't failed to patch for 6 months something that you should have patched. But as long as that's aside, then we like this legislation. We put together a group of folks from our policy council. James, we have a group of people that are governmental affairs executives from our board members and several cyber lawyers. So some folks from that group and some CISOs came together, and we've been working with the senator's staff to work on the language. I think we've gone through 3 iterations. I think we're in the final draft. And I think that bill is going to be dropped very soon. And the good Lord knows we need it, because this patch will quilt a work of 50 state, with South Dakota and South Carolina going in 2019. We now have 50 states plus I think 4 of the 6 territories. So it's needed.
Yeah, that always seems to be something where in your incident response plan, right? You have the legal part of it, and in that legal piece of it, you have all different 50 states and what the requirements are for every single state and every single territory. If you work in those territories, it's quite a challenge.
And you have to constantly update those requirements because those legislation state legislation doesn't remain static. One day safe harbor looks like this, and then the next year safe harbor looks like that. And you have to constantly be aware of the changes. So compliance is important. And while I would not say that compliance, I think people who say compliance doesn't equal security are wrong, because study after study shows that compliant firms are breached much less than non-compliant firms. But compliance is costly, and it's an administrative burden when you have to do it across 50 states and 4 territories. Many of my CISOs will tell you that set the security bar as high as you want, but give us one place to file, which will reduce their costs from an administrative standpoint. And with Senator Portman's bill, it would encourage companies to adhere to a level of security measure that doesn't exist today.
So would you be, under Senator Portman's bill, would you be reporting to like the FTC or the...
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we and it's similar to, we recently released a privacy framework document, which we've been advertising through LinkedIn. And we're going to be talking a lot more about it in the new year, because that's the other, that's like our second highest priority, right. Privacy legislation, getting ahead of that. But we laid out a set of like 7 guidelines that said, here's some things that we need in order for the Ntsc in our community to back a bill. And we support the FTC within parameters. We're not enthusiastic about them having additional rulemaking authority. The other thing that we're encouraging folks to do is look at, like with the Children's Protection Act, COPA, state attorney generals can enforce the legislation. So what's to stop state attorney generals from being the ones who would enforce federal legislation? We already do it with COPA. So we've been having that conversation as well. But yeah, the FTC for now, no private right to action, and preemption of all current existing state legislation. Those are the things that we support. So
when we look at Senator Portman's bill, how is, with everything going on, this being an election season as well, but obviously, I remember 2017 and 18 when we were on the Hill, cyber was still, I remember in one of our meetings, I think it was 2018, we were meeting with one of our elected officials, and as people around the room were introducing themselves as CISOs, he stopped and asked, "What's a CISO?" Is that still the case?
We were chatting about this just before we started this conversation. We're going to lose a couple, 2 or 3 really cyber savvy legislators this year. Will Hurd is leaving from Texas, and Tom Graves from Georgia, and there's some other ones who are in tough elections. There are a group of folks in the House and Senate, Mike McCall, Jim Langevin, Ted Lieu from California. There are some folks that really understand cyber, and Benny Thompson from Mississippi, who's the chair of the House Committee on Homeland Security. But it's not as deep and as wide as we would like it to be. And so part of our mission is to continue to educate legislators, and again, educate them on the impact of legislation. So you talk about, California Consumer Privacy Act, and, some of the collateral damage that bill has done in terms of enforcing it, and it's now fully enforced. I don't want to be too forward, but I mean, if you think about GDPR and how long it took to put that together, 10, 12 years to put that legislation together, and then you look at CCPA, that took 10 or 12 days to put together. It clearly has some challenges, which people are trying to overcome. I think the intentions are honorable, but our goal is to try and get people to understand that you have to be really thoughtful about this legislation, because the impact it can have on American businesses can be pretty dramatic.
Yeah, that's a very interesting piece. I was part of a discussion in the EU on GDPR and how GDPR is viewed internationally as a privacy law, and one of the people on there was an Austrian enforcer of GDPR, and we were sitting on the same panel, and he was talking about how it helps businesses more. It gives citizens the rights to their data. And so I asked them pre-GDPR to name me one business where if I reached out and asked them to delete my data, they wouldn't do it.
And what did he say?
Deafening silence. I go, show me a place, show me a company that said, to you, Patrick, when you called them or you emailed them or you wrote them and you said, hey, I want you to delete all my profile data, where they said, no, we're not doing it. Most organizations who were socially responsible did that already. Now, you can say a handful didn't do it, but we don't legislate based on a handful of bad actors. We legislate based on setting some sort of industry standard on privacy. And we see that with self-regulation in a lot of the new and upcoming industries and technologies. We see that with AI, we see that with machine learning, kind of companies trying to self-regulate its usage and the way they program it and the way they use it and the way that data can be used. And so privacy to me has a very interesting point, because I think data breach notification, the way Senator Portman's bills were in, and I saw when you guys released the first draft of it. I haven't seen the third or the third reiteration of the bill, but I saw the first one because I think Kevin sent it to me.
Right.
And so, and I read it and I was like, well, this is really good. I mean, you can literally slap privacy on top of this and add in the data breach notification that as part of data breach notification, any customer has the right to ask an organization to delete their data, and you wouldn't need a privacy law because you've just addressed it. Most privacy laws like GDPR, and that was a consensus, by the way, with several lawyers on the panel that I did in Europe, in Brussels, virtually, of course, because of COVID. But a lot of us saw it as almost a way to take away from small businesses and entrepreneurs from starting new businesses because of GDPR compliance. So it targeted big tech, but you're taxing big tech. That's all this is. Google, Facebook. I mean, I was speaking to them off the record with representatives from those big companies in Europe. And off the record, they told me, Pat, that they were just like, yeah, we just calculated as part of our budget. It's just it's a cost of doing business. We know that we're going to have to pay the French 50 million euros this year, and we're going to have to pay the Germans 75 million euros, and we're going to have to pay the Irish nothing because the Irish don't do that. And we're going to pay all these different countries, but they go, predominantly we're worried about the countries with a negative budget surplus because they're coming to make up for that surplus through this privacy law. And right. And there's a very interesting YouTube video out there of a privacy advocate in Germany. The video's in German, so I had someone translate it for me. But he's walking around the streets and asking people, do they feel like they have more control over their data thanks to GDPR? And they all said, no, because there's not one company in Germany that didn't delete my data when I asked them to pre-GDPR. So what has GDPR really given you?
Yeah, I think... I think always, I lived in Europe for 14 years.
Right.
And, the regulations in Europe have always been tighter around privacy than they have been in this country. Even when I worked with a startup over there, I remember, we had to make sure that, certain data, remained within servers within certain countries, and they couldn't be taken out of the country. And, there were a lot of interesting regulations. And then, we just had Privacy Shield go to hell in a handbasket,
Right.
Which adds additional complication. But, I'm comfortable with the idea that we need privacy regulation in this country. I just think we need to think about, the three biggest issues that constantly come up, and they are a political divide. There's, no sense arguing about that. We have preemption, and there
data
are
breach
two
notification. Right.
of that. On the left, totally opposed to preemption. On the right, totally supporting it. We have enforcement, and everybody agrees the FTC should be the enforcer, but the question is, how much power are you going to give the FTC? And there have been some bills which blow the FTC up to a 500 member, 500 new team members, and 2/3 of them are lawyers, or, the FTC is the right place to do it. It's just be thoughtful about how we do it. And then, and if you don't think that's important, just ask the former CEO of LabMD.
I've got Mike's book right behind me. I've had Mike on the podcast before too. We've had that conversation plenty of times.
And then finally, the third issue, it's preemption, it's enforcement, and it's private right to action. And what we say on private right to action, what we, the Ntsc, say is that, the focus should be on real harm and real risk to privacy. And if that is, I'm not sure, I'm kind of showing up as a blurry right-hand side.
No, you're fine. On my end of the, on my production board, we're straight. That's just the,
okay. I look fine in the right-hand quarter. Yeah. So those are the three issues: preemption,
enforcement,
private right to action. And there is a political divide on each one of those issues. So,
I'm surprised, by the way, on the right to preempt being that the left is for, one side, the side that's for that's for preemption is the right, which typically, are really big on state rights, like don't have the federal government, infringe on state rights, like let the states run their own show. And then that being kind of, that's a very surprising kind of divide there.
Realize that and I understand this, every state attorney general in the United States thinks that he or she is the best person to judge, how to evaluate the privacy of their, the members of their state. Right. Yeah, their citizens. I get it. It makes sense. But look, here we have 50 different pieces of legislation on data breach notification. And trust me, with any major breach, and I'm not going to mention any companies, but with any major breach, and we know who they are, folks in certain states are more protected than folks in other states because the legislation is all over the place. So part of creating a national standard is giving every citizen in the United States the same level of protection. To me, that's probably the most critical reason for doing this. We're going to make sure that every citizen in the United States has the same rights, the same level of protection if there's a breach, a national breach, and we know which ones those are. On privacy, we have 3 states today: California, CCPA, Nevada, and Maine. We have 15 states that currently have legislation in some, stage within the state legislative process. And then we have another states that have started the process and the bills have died. New York is an example, but that's going to come back. So we're headed down the same path on privacy that we were on data breach notification legislation. And I can't imagine if we've got 50 different pieces of privacy legislation, 50 different pieces of data breach notification legislation, we're going to legislate companies into And I can tell you about one bank that spends over $1 million a year just on tracking and making sure they continue to be compliant with all of the regulations that they have to be compliant with. And banks are probably the biggest example of people who are completely regulated, not over regulated, but completely regulated. So, we have a new bill that just dropped, the setting an American framework to ensure data access, transparency, and accountability, the Safe Data Act, which was dropped in mid-September. We've got Senator Thune, Wicker, Fisher, Blackburn, and they introduced that bill. It won't go anywhere right now, but it's another piece of legislation that we're examining it, and to give you an idea how thick that legislation is, it's a big piece of legislation which I've been delving through. Yeah, from a legislative standpoint, those are the two top things. We're focused on data breach, we're focused on privacy, but there are three other things that we're really keen to work on. Workforce development is another priority for us. There's this, again, I call it a patchwork quilt of cyber scholarship for service programs that exist today. We are strongly endorsing the concept of a national cyber for service scholarship program that kind of embraces everything and brings it together. There are over 5,000 universities, colleges, community colleges in this country. Only 86 of them are certified for any kind of cyber for scholarship program. The state of Georgia, which is where I'm based, we have 8 nationally, Ntsc, nationally recognized.
And we have the #1 school in the entire country.
Arguably, and I say arguably because every time I say that, someone argues with me. But whether it's Jeff Hancock at George Washington or someone at SMU or Texas A&M, there are a lot of Georgetown, a lot of good programs. Ohio State has a great program, and Helen Patton, who's the sister there, is on our board. So I got to make sure I pay homage to them. But what we're saying is, look, let's expand this program. And let's treat it like the military. You get 4 years of college for 6 years of service. And there's a reason for that. And if you just bear with me for a second, I want to delve into this. You hear this constant chatter about this huge shortage of cyber warriors, right? We got this. Right. But when you look at it, you go to CyberSeek and you look at where the real gaps are. You take Cybersecurity Plus, which is the entry-level certification, and you look at the number of people with that certification, and you look at the number of jobs being advertised requiring that certification, you've got about 5.5 people for every job. Now you go up the chain, you go CCISP, CISSPs, Certified Security Program Manager, all of those higher level certifications. I don't know if I got all the acronyms right. Typically come with experience. 7 to 10 years is where people start getting those higher levels. And you start looking at the jobs that are advertised for those certifications and the number of people who have those certifications, you got like 0.4. So the gap is up here, not down here. So does that mean we don't need more people at the entry level? No, because over here in the federal sector, we currently have 40,000 jobs they can't fill. So let's create. And the other thing is over 50% of the current cyber workforce is baby boomers and Generation X. So over the next decade, you're going to see this huge exodus of over half the workforce. So we need a pipeline, but how do we funnel that pipeline? So let's take people, let's give them an incentive to get into cyber by giving them 3 or 4 years of college, whatever, letting them go work for the federal government, military, as civilians, whatever, and then come into the private workforce in 6 years, significantly more qualified to be in the private workforce, but more importantly, they have the opportunity to stay with the federal government and enjoy the benefits there. So that's something we're heavily promoting. We've got some senators very interested in in helping us do that. And I think you'll see some legislation as soon as the dust clears after the election, probably February, March. We'll be dropping some legislation on that to try and drive that. And we've got really good support. And as I told you, John Felker, who up until recently was with CISO, has joined the Ntsc Advisory Council specifically to help us drive that workforce agenda. He's currently working with the University Systems of Georgia. He's also working with the equivalent organization in Florida. So we're excited that John's coming on board. And I'll mention that next week there's a fireside chat between John and Marlene Allison, who is this global CISO at Johnson & Johnson, talking more about what we're trying to do on this. So if you haven't registered for that, ntsc.org events calendar, you can register. Just a little plug there.
That is quite okay. I think most people should register. I think John's one of the more fascinating people that come out of the government. I will tell you this. So speaking of kind of veterans, so for the month of November, I'm dedicating the entire month to veterans on the podcast. Every single channel that I do a podcast on, all month, I'm speaking to 26 veterans, highlighting their stories of transitioning from the military to civilian life. And the reason I say that is because so many veterans that come out of the service who may have not been cyber warriors in the service, right? They couldn't serve in cyber command, but I'm speaking to a lot of people, and I take these calls all the time, Pat, where, hey, I'm getting a medical discharge. I got injured during a training or during an operation somewhere. I'm getting a medical discharge, and now, I was a 13 Bravo in the Army, or an 11 Alpha or whatever, and now I find myself having to think of a career a lot earlier than what I had anticipated, and I don't know where to go. And I'm thinking, cyber, how do I get started?
Right.
And I think this is a big miss in our military, is these people who can't continue to serve in combat units, but have the drive, want to serve the country, want to do good, and end up going, to a 2-year college or a 4-year university to get their cybersecurity degree or get cybersecurity training. Some of them do boot camps, a 16-week boot camp, and they get jobs, and but there's a direct shortage. And since November 11th is Veterans Day, and apparently everyone gets a full month, but veterans, we get 2 days a year for whatever reason. Semper Fi, right? Like,
well, I was going to say, you're not going to forget November 10th, are you?
No.
245th birthday of the United States Marine Corps.
Yeah, Semper Fi. So I decided that I am dedicating, and I'm starting a movement to dedicate the entire month of November to veterans. And I'm starting with veterans in cyber, and hopefully more people will join kind of this movement with the idea of highlighting our veterans and what assets they can be to workforce.
And I'll talk more about to this issue with you offline, but there's a chap I'd like to introduce you to. His name is Ian. I think it's Camber Systems, CAMBER, but I'll look it up. I was recently at the Cyber Threat Conference at Sea Island in mid-September, and I met Ian, former Special Forces chap who got lit up one night in Afghanistan, and I mean lit up pretty bad. He's heavily involved in this organization that helps veterans who have gone through that experience, and you know what I mean by lit up. And who are now trying to make that transition back into the real world after going through some catastrophic injuries. So love to introduce you to him, and maybe you could talk to him about his experiences and building a company, coming from that experience, and in building a cyber company. He's a delightful chap to talk to.
I would love that, and I would appreciate it. I think when you talk about workforce development, and we hear the number of shortages, right? And I'm great that finally someone can say, you're probably one of the first guests I've had on the show that when, typically people will drop and say, we're missing 3 million jobs. And I'm like, well, Kevin Peterson, our good friend Kevin Peterson.
I know Kevin.
And I love Kevin. Kevin and I were having a beer a while ago. And Kevin goes, because we live not far from each other, and there's a great little place in Avalon that's a German beer garden, and we typically go there and grab a beer and have a conversation. And Kevin looked at the workforce shortage numbers in cyber, and then he went back to the 70s and compared it to the nursing shortage of the 1970s.
Right.
And he said, how did we solve the nursing shortage of the 1970s? And he goes, it wasn't hiring more nurses, it was automation. I can tell you that today, in one of the SOCs that I work with, we don't have level 1 analysts. 0 level 1 analysts. It's all automated. It's all automated. Their entire job is automated. So when people start at Security Plus, and you mentioned the number of 5.5 people for one opening with a Security Plus requirement, it's because they're given an entryway, but they're not going beyond that. Like Kurt John, who's the CSO over at Siemens. 10 years ago, he started as a hacker, as a certified ethical hacker. Today, he is a CISO, 10 years later, right? So it's beyond Security Plus. It's beyond anything else. It's mindset, right? We're training people to get this keyboard experience. We're forgetting to teach them business. And so you create a gap.
And the other thing that I think is really critical, and I hear this from my community all the time, and when I talk about my community, I'm talking about the CISOs on my board, the folks on my policy council, my advisory council, which you were a major part of up until this year, is aptitude.
Right.
Does this person have the aptitude for the job? And my favorite story is a CISO was interviewing a chap who'd come in for a job in the SOC, and he was driving a truck. This happened in Atlanta. One of my CISOs in Atlanta, he was driving a truck for Coca-Cola. And this CISO immediately, instinctively knew this guy had the aptitude for the job. And the real story was the battle with HR to go hire a truck driver for Coca-Cola for an entry-level position in the SOC. But today, this guy is a senior analyst in that SOC. Yeah. So, it's not always the 4-year degree, the master's degree out of Georgia Tech, which is a great degree. But, sometimes it's just the 18-year-old kid who spent the last 2 years in the basement with, the proverbial, Mountain Dew cases around him, but really has the aptitude for the job, has the instincts for the job. So don't diss that. And when I used to go to Fort Gordon, I'm so sad we don't do that anymore, because I think you came with us a couple of times.
Yeah.
We used to go every 8 weeks. They cycle through a class in the advanced cybersecurity program there. And it's a joint program, so it's across all branches of the service. And we would go up there every week, 8 weeks, the last week of the program. And we would take 3 or 4 CISOs, and we would do about an hour panel conversation, and we do about 2 hours of Q&A. And the questions would range. It'd be like, how much money I'm going to make when I get out of this chicken shit outfit, to how do you use X, Y, or Z technology? So, the questions range, and typically, 50 to 70 students in a class, about a third of them are getting out in the next, 10 to 12 months, about a third of them in the next 2 or 3 years, and about a third of them are career military, and they're not going to get out for a long time. So you want to focus on that first group intensely, and seed the second group. But I was talking to the senior warrant officer who was my liaison, and he talked about aptitude, because they're pulling these kids into the program out of the barracks. These kids don't have cyber background, but they go through tests, and they figure out who has the aptitude, and they throw them into this program for 8 weeks. And then if they make it through the program, then they're out and so back in their branch of service and being the cyber representative, early days, but they get a chance to grow in the field.
Well, so cyber goes across multiple different aspects. Cyber is an active part of combat. We've seen that with some of the reports that have come out with, Russia essentially having ships that are targeting, other naval units, with cyber warfare, and in GPS and signal interception and so many different things. We see it now that cyber is part of an active workforce. I attended a event between Israel, US, and the EU talking about cyber warfare and kind of rules of engagement. Again, all virtual, by the way. When I say attended an event, I mean, I was still sitting in sweatpants and my black t-shirt, drinking my espresso in the comfort of my home in Georgia, which I love, by the way. And shout out to UNG. I haven't given UNG a shout out this whole episode, but number one school in the country, winning the NSA Codebreaker Challenge last year.
It's interesting. I had a chance, and I couldn't do it because of my schedule. But one of the legislative assistants for one of our congressional leaders was in Atlanta on his way to Fort Gordon to participate in a field exercise. It was one of the first field exercises where they were going to insert a cyber factor into it. And a component into it, and it goes to the integrity of the data. So if I'm a tank commander and I get information that the enemy is over there, and that information through cyber, somehow through the cyber, I forget the word I'm looking for, but you know what I mean. So some adversary has given me false information. The enemy is actually over there. I'm pointing right and left. That was the first time they integrated a cyber component into the, an actual field exercise, intentionally to screw up the tank commanders. It was a tank exercise. I had a chance to go down and observe it. I didn't go, but I talked to the chap when he came back through Atlanta on his way to Washington, and he said it was fascinating, and what they learned from it. And data integrity. We had Dr. Kamal Jabbar, his last name, Jamal Kabar, who's the chief scientist at the Air Force Research Lab in Rome, New York, came and spoke to us one time. And his real focus entirely was on, focusing on data integrity. And we did it at United Airlines. And Emily Heath, who was a CISO at United at the time, who subsequently moved to DocuSign, Emily talked about load-bearing data, how concerned they are that if an adversary were to come in and manipulate the data that talks about, the weight and the fuel components on an airplane, because
right.
The vast majority of the weight in an airplane is cargo. Because most people don't realize that's where they make all their money. They don't make their money on passengers, they make their money on cargo. So they've got to get the fuel component right. But if you want to screw up a plane, screw with the integrity of that fuel data. And so that's one of the biggest security concerns for all the CISOs in the airline industry. So data integrity is so important today, James. I mean, all of these things that are swirling around, it's really interesting when you talk to CISOs about it. The last two, I'm just going to quickly mention the last two priorities for the Ntsc, and I think these will remain consistent next year. The last two are critical infrastructure, and we're still kind of sorting through that. We've got a program on November 10th talking about operational technology, industrial control systems, and how do you prevent cyber attacks on those. And then, we've got the global head of the program that focuses on that at Checkpoint, speaking along with a senior director from CISA on November 10th. And then, so that's important. And then we're looking at what the Solarium Commission recommended in terms of systemically important critical infrastructure and how they're going to get more information and more insight than other folks. And we're talking to Mark Montgomery about what that really means and how that's going to work out. So that's something that's developing for us. We're still kind of, got our toes in the water, but our community thinks that's critically important. They voted on that last year. And then finally, continuing to, strengthen the public-private dialogue, continuing to work with CISA and Chris Krebs and his team, and working with the FTC and staying on the Hill and educating our legislators. Those are our 5 priorities.
I will tell you this, you guys, the NTC, and you've done an amazing job of building that private-public partnership between CISOs in the federal government, especially CISA. Before CISA was CISA supporting the bill to actually give them a cyber in the name, because before that they had a really weird name. I forgot what it was, but it had, what was it?
The national protections and
It was like, and it had multiple P's in it. I remember it had like multiple P's.
national protections and something directorate.
Yeah, it was. I will say that if you're a CISO and you're listening and you want to build that trust, the NTSC is the way to go, because you guys, you've done the work. You've built that trust. It's been flying to DC and meeting with them and bringing CISOs and having them sit in the same room and having that conversation. That doesn't come easy. And a lot of people are very suspicious of giving the government any sort of insight because they're afraid of the repercussions that come from it. And in cyber, it's so critical for corporations and government to work together on security, because when the NSA yesterday issued the 25 most critical vulnerabilities that China uses, the Communist Party of China's hackers use against organizations. And I reported on it on today's practitioner brief in the morning. And if I tell you that some of these are from 2015, would you believe me?
No, I would. Yeah. Absolutely.
So we have CVEs here that were issued in 2015, 2018, 2017. And you're starting to realize that our biggest challenge in security today is going to be patch management and vulnerability management, because that's where we're seeing. It's not the technology, right? We have great cybersecurity vendors out there. You've mentioned a few where, they're able to give you the technology to support your program. But where we're really lacking is the idea of coming into patch management and vulnerability management on some of these critical 0 days. And when they're being exploited actively, it's very hard for a lot of organizations to fathom that happening, right? And earlier you said something around compliance. If you're compliant, you're secure. Generally speaking, yes, but I don't support that fully, because a lot of people will do the very bare basics of compliance, which gives you a sense of security, but doesn't really give you security. Defense in depth is needed. Our buddy Vladimir, we got to say hi to Vladimir.
Hey, Vladimir.
Hey, Vlad. Vladimir obviously talks a lot about the CIS top 20. And he goes, if you do the top 9 right, you've pretty much got a compliant and a good security program in place with a very strong foundation. But you got to do the top 9.
We would also be amiss if we didn't say Semper Fi to Vladimir.
We did not. Yeah, we got to say Semper Fi to Vladimir. I got a lovely email yesterday from Vladimir, and he's just such a wealth of knowledge and just an amazing person. I gotta make sure to give him an honorable mention on this podcast.
Another source of insight that I would highly recommend people read is the Homeland Threat Assessment, which comes out every month. It's not a terribly thick document, but if you read the forward, I was reading it earlier, and fundamentally, what it says is that. Let me see if I can find this. Anyway, I suggest you read it, and what it basically says is this stuff is not going to stop, whether it's Russia, China,
Iran, North Korea.
Yeah, Iran, state actors, and non-state actors who are sponsored by state actors. The number of sponsored actors by North Korea, for example, is just out. It boggles the mind. And these people are actually working on quota systems. They have to produce so much money every month, or they're not meeting their quota. And if you don't, it's not like
and if you don't meet your quota, you don't get to go and say, "Listen, boss, next month this is a North Korean dictator. This guy, I think, killed his own uncle. He's not going to have a problem offing you."
It's not like working for a U.S. sales organization, which worst case scenario is you're going to get put on probation or fired. in North Korea, you're probably going to get a whole lot more damage done to you if you don't meet your quota. And so they are highly incented to meet their quotas. And I mean, I don't want to be cliched, but it is, as Vladimir often says, I'm only one patch away from losing a job. It's challenging when you've got to get everything right, and they only have to get it right one time, and you got to get it right every single day, and you got to get up in the morning and often make decisions based on risk because you have a defined budget. I mean, not everybody is Bank of America, not everybody is JP Morgan Chase with very large budgets. I mean, I've heard Bank of America doesn't actually have a number on the budget. They're going to spend whatever it takes to defend their consumers. And I suspect it's very similar to JP Morgan Chase. But for a lot of people, that's not the reality. So I've got X number of dollars, and I got to make decisions about what I'm going to defend against. I encourage people to read the Solarium Commission report. It's a big report when you first look at it. Break it down into the 6 pillars and take each pillar and digest it one at a time. Spend a week on a pillar. Say I'm going to read the report over the next 6 months, 2 months. 2 months. 6 pillars over 2 months. And it gives you slightly over a week to read each one. But what he calls for is a whole of nation approach to defense. It's, let's stop. And I had this conversation with the CEO of an ISAC recently. I think that the ISACs are really good at communicating within their funnel. They're getting better at communicating across, but there's still work to be done. But in general, cyber people are not very good at sharing information. Within the ISACs, they're pretty good. But across the ISACs and across, they're getting better, and that's the good news. But we need to have the ability to make sure everybody has the same information at the same time. If you're seeing something that I should see, I need to know that in real time. It's got to be real time. It's got to be contextual. We got to get a lot better at threat intelligence. When John Felker ran the InKick, we talked a lot about that with John. It's getting better, but there's a lot of room for improvement on threat intelligence across the patch.
I think there's a lot of noise around threat intelligence. And for a lot of CISOs, the difficulty is, do you build your own threat intel team? Do you use several outside vendors? And then what differentiates different vendors? I mean, I don't know when was the last time you heard a threat intel sales pitch, Pat, but they all pretty much sound the same. There's a really funny episode of Entourage where Vince decides to leave Ari Gold. And he goes to meet with all the other agents in LA, right? And all of them give him the same exact presentation. McDonald's, Mercedes-Benz, Vincent Chase, Burger King, BMW, Vincent Chase, right? And you go like, I don't know how any of you are different. And I think the challenge is we don't have a real clear differentiator today in threat intelligence unless you build your own program. And if you don't have the budget to build your own program, you end up in a slew of challenges.
Yeah, and I think there, the Threat Intelligence Alliance, there are some programs that are out there that are good, and then there are companies, like CrowdStrike who see everything that they own as proprietary, so they're not going to be part of the Threat Intelligence Alliance or Cyber Threat Alliance, whatever it's called. I think Rick Howard was instrumental. Palo Alto was instrumental in setting that up. There are other companies like Cyware who I think do a good job. There are a lot of companies out there that are pushing and getting better and better. But to your point, it's hard when you've got all that noise in the marketplace. It's hard to distinguish the signal from the noise and to figure out who truly differentiates themselves. And I have CISOs who, to your point, have built their own, systems, and they're quite happy with it, and it works well for them. But if we're going to have a whole of nation perspective on defense, then we have to figure out how we get everybody the same information at the same time, so that we are all protected. And that's a huge challenge going into the next few years. And, automation orchestration could certainly help with that. We did some work with Kim Watson at the Applied Research Lab at Johns Hopkins University. She runs the program there, which I've completely forgot, integrated something, defense program, but it's all about orchestration automation. And we could circle back to your point earlier. It may be that, all of our cyber workforce shortages disappear in 5 years because of AI.
Well, I don't think it'll disappear. I think you're still going to see that mid-management role still exist. And in 5 years, we'll have people with 5 years of experience ready to go into that mid-manager role. Right now, we don't have enough people. There's a really funny joke. I did a podcast several weeks ago, and one of the slides, it was a LinkedIn live session that I did. And it was a company that said, we're looking for someone with Kubernetes experience, but you got to have minimum 12 years of experience in Kubernetes. Well, the founder of Kubernetes applied for the job, and they declined him. They said, you don't have enough experience. And he goes, I invented Kubernetes 8 years ago, lady. You can't have anyone with 12 years of experience. It's only 8 years old.
Right. Yeah, I think I actually saw that on a LinkedIn post that you did, and I had to laugh about that. Hey, James, I don't know how much time we had left.
Well, we're almost out of time, so I want to ask you this. Two things, and then I'm going to put you on the hot seat real quick.
Okay.
So any openings for CISOs on the council at the moment, or are you fully booked?
No, we are actually, this is the time of year we're actually in the process of going through our growth period. We're about to announce that Meredith Harper, the CISO at Eli Lilly, is joining our board, and that Michael Palmer, who is a former CISO at the NFL, is now the CISO at Hearst Corporation, is joining our board. And there's another 6 CISOs in the queue that we're talking to. But our objective is to have 60 CISOs on our board. We're going to go through a certain amount of churn every year because some CISOs just leave their jobs. Pete Cronin left Warner Media and took a sabbatical, so he left the board, right? And Elizabeth Joyce left HPE, went to State Street, so she left the board, but we think she'll come back. So we have a certain amount of churn, but right now we're definitely open to talking to chief information security officers from Fortune 1000 companies that are not on the seller side, exclusively on the buyer side, and so yeah, if you're interested, Patrick Gaul, patrick@ntsc.org is my email.
I'll have Patrick's information in the description below. I'll put your LinkedIn profile. I won't put your email because I don't want the Chinese and the Russians to start spamming you.
Okay.
I'll put your LinkedIn. That way you have some control of it. But I'm going to put you on the hot seat. So this is the best part of the podcast. You get to go on the hot seat with everyone. It's our CISO Insight Round. And it's where I get to ask you 6 questions. You get to answer them very fast. You're on the hot seat, Pat. So
before we start, can I just add one other thing to what
absolutely.
I just said? For those folks who don't have the bandwidth to be on the board, and I get that. Not everybody has the bandwidth to serve on the board. Not everybody wants to pay the board fee. We are launching a new member program at the beginning of next year that will offer a number of benefits, which I'm happy to share with you again, the same way. But if you're interested in knowing about that program, it will give you the legislative updates. It'll give you a chance to add your voice to our voice when we go to the Hill. It'll give you significant discounts to our regional and national events when we start going live again, hopefully sometime in the second half of next year. So we're going to launch that program in January. We're going to offer a discount to anybody who signs up before January. So you'll look for that to come out on LinkedIn and some other places in the next few weeks.
Once you get that and you launch the program, just send it over to me. I'll post it to all of our listeners and I'll mention it in one of our next podcasts.
Thank you, James. Now I'm ready for my 6 questions.
Are you ready? Are you ready? So I have a Buzzword Graveyard. I don't know if you've heard about it. It's really famous among CISOs. My backyard's the woods, so I've got a hidden graveyard of buzzwords. What's one buzzword you'd get rid of?
What's what?
One buzzword you would get rid of. Bury, destroy, eliminate.
One buzzword that I would get rid of. Gosh. Um, there are so many buzzwords. Shit. Sorry. I have mine just go completely blank on a question. What's a buzzword?
I can throw you a bones. It could be zero trust. It can be AI. It can be machine learning. It can be all kinds of fun buzzwords. We've had
Yeah,
some pretty creative ones.
you know, yeah, I guess, yeah, yeah, something along the lines of active cyber defense. People talk about active cyber defense all the time, and I don't know what they mean, and typically they don't know what they mean. So that
Um,
would be my buzz phrase.
the buzzword active cyber defense has never been in our graveyard, just so you know. You've
Okay.
just forced me to dig a new 6-foot grave and bury a new word. So thank you for the workout. I really do appreciate it. Active cyber defense buried. What's one technology that you feel is going to change the way cybersecurity is managed in the future?
Artificial intelligence, without a doubt. AI.
What's the book you're reading right now or the last book you read?
Last book I read was The Fifth Domain by Richard Clark,
Okay.
um, which I would highly recommend to everybody to read. But with me, James, if I'm not reading pieces of legislation that thick or the Solarium Commission, a lot of what I'm reading is really work related. But when I have David Sanger's new book sitting on my shelf, ready to take that down. But yeah, The Fifth Domain was the last book I read, and I had a chance to have dinner with Richard Clark, and he asked me questions about the book, and you know how I read a book and mark it up, and I was actually able to quote Bible and chapter and verse to him, so I got credit for that.
Brilliant. What's the last movie you saw? The last movie you saw?
The last movie I saw was the one about Ruth Gen.
RBG?
Yeah, RBG, the one that just came out on, I think it was Netflix. Watched it with my wife last weekend before I came to North Carolina. I
Brilliant.
thought it was brilliant. She's such a fascinating lady.
She is. Whether you agree with her politics or not, you have
Uh,
to appreciate the woman. You have to appreciate the woman. She was
yeah,
phenomenal.
and forget where she leaned right or left. Just about her journey.
Yeah.
If you
I
think
think if
about
people paid more attention to the journey, you would dismiss a little bit of your bias towards politics. But unfortunately, that's not the case. What's your favorite music? What do you listen to on every single day?
you
Or
know, I did a thing with Roy Hadley recently in part of the program he's doing with Tag, and he asked me the same question, and I I'm a big vinyl guy. I love
okay.
vinyl. I have a top end turntable and system. So when I'm feeling kind of in the mood for something, it's Kind of Blue by Miles Davis is my go-to album. It just allows me to sit back and relax and get lost in what I think is one of the most complex pieces of music. I have to say, however, um, Rolling Stone came out with their top 500, and while I think Marvin Gaye and Let's Get It On, and that whole album was brilliant. I can't believe they put it above Pet Sounds. Pet Sounds was number two, but I'd flip those.
Yeah, there's a music is like food, right? There's a debate over what's better, but you with taste and smell, there's no arguing. Those palates are different for each person.
Yeah, I have a 24-year-old who's like a walking encyclopedia when it comes to music, and he's decided he's never reading another Rolling Stone again after this 500.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm a jazz guy. Put Chet Baker on, put Miles Davis on. Um, you know, those are the kind of people I like to listen to when I really want to just veg out.
And the final question on the hot seat is: what's one thing you took away from the COVID-19 crisis?
How real it is. Both my wife and my 24-year-old son I just mentioned both had COVID. My wife was moderately ill. My son was very ill. ended up in the hospital, ended up on inhaler, steroids, heavy respiratory infection. Took my son a good, 8-10 weeks to fully recover. Took my wife a good 6 weeks to kind of get past the fatigue part of it. For those people who are anti-maskers, fair enough. You believe what you want to believe. But, my daughter and I, who's 22, wore masks the whole time we were in the house. Anytime we were around the two of them, I'm 70 years old. I didn't get it and she didn't get it. So, maybe we were just lucky, or maybe we practiced. And please wash your hands. Every
wash your hands. Practice good hygiene. If you're outdoors and you're walking all by yourself, you probably don't need a mask. But if you're around other people, whether you like it or not, just put on a mask, because even if you don't want it, protect others. You don't know who the person across from you is going to be seeing after they see you and how they could be impacted by your decisions.
It's just a common courtesy. I mean, it is, as I say, it's just common courtesy. We got our seatbelts in our car, put a mask on.
Well,
anyway.
So we are all wrapped up. Patrick, thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
For inviting me. I always enjoy chatting with you. It's always a great conversation. I am, as I said before we started, I admire you and what you've done in the last few years to build your brand. And I wish you continued success, brother.
Thank you so much, folks. Patrick Gaul, ntsc.org. If you're a CISO and you're looking for a place to belong, a place where you can get your voice heard, Patrick and the community that he's built there is absolutely the place to go. That's it for us here today. We'll be back with another CISO Talk next week. Until then, folks, on behalf of myself, on behalf of Patrick Gaul, we want to wish you all to stay very, very healthy, mask up, practice safe social distancing, go out and vote, because your vote does matter. Your vote does matter. It makes Patrick's life much easier when you vote for people and you ask your voted officials. I've asked every single one, what are you doing about cyber? What do you know about cyber? Let's get the right people in place who can actually support our agenda on the Hill. And with that being said, stay cyber safe.